Oh, great. All right, welcome to Bother the Father. We only have one person here. That's okay. Online, please feel free. So it's to anyone, any discussion whatsoever, any question. I'll try to answer the best of our ability. If I don't know, I'll let you know we don't know, and we'll try to find out at a later date. So, floor is open.
How do you choose what Eucharistic prayer you use every day?
The general instruction of the Roman Missal basically says it's up to the discretion of the pastor.
Mhm.
So a lot of that might depend on like, okay, there's kind of a natural solemnity involved with each of those Eucharistic prayers.
Mhm.
So, for instance, the second Eucharistic prayer is the shortest.
Yeah.
So many may like, oh, for a daily mass, that seems pretty like
Okay.
applicable.
Okay, that's
Um,
why I hear
yeah,
it so
I mean,
often. Okay.
but a lot of priests will may like kind of vary it depending on even the season. So like maybe somebody take the approach of, yeah, but even though it's a daily mass, there's maybe not a saint for that day. It's still Easter, so maybe we'll do Eucharist prayer 3 instead of 2 because there's a little more solemnity
Okay.
involved with that, right?
Okay.
Maybe it also depend on maybe if you're doing a funeral or not. Like one thing I like now, maybe other people may not, but Eucharist Prayer 3 has like a very beautiful kind of addendum in it for funerals that are
Okay.
kind of nice. So I may use that more important to use that one than maybe other ones.
Okay.
Um, Sometimes the family might have a preference, so you'd be like, yeah, sure. That doesn't happen very often.
Okay.
Some of the other ones are maybe less used. Like there's uh, Eucharist prayers for like various occasions.
Various needs are beautiful.
Yeah, and they're not really used all that often because
Yeah.
we're like, well, when should you use them? I mean, so like if like for instance, the election of the Pope, that could be an occasion to use that particular Eucharistic prayer. It was very odd though this time around because the election of a Pope fell within the octave of Easter.
Easter in here.
So it's like, okay, right. Or at least I should say the death of the Pope. The election happened a little later. So usually the reconciliation ones maybe used around Lent, right?
Mhm.
Or like maybe a particular day that's directed towards that, like maybe the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, right? So this is the day of human life. So maybe that's a good time to use that one. There's certain ones that can only be used though with a particular preface. So in other words, there's different prefaces within. So if we look at the Eucharistic prayer, the Eucharistic prayer actually starts with the dialogue of the preface. So the Lord be with you, with your spirit, lift
Right.
up your hearts, lift up the Lord. Let's give thanks to the Lord our God, right and just. So each one of those prefaces are kind of directed towards a season or for a particular day. So like let's say for instance today was Saint Bernardine of Siena, right? So there's a preface for pastors that would be appropriate to use. And so even within that though, there's allowance of whatever Eucharist prayer you want to use. The only one that actually has a real restriction is Eucharistic prayer 4. So for Eucharistic prayer 4, you have to use the proper preface for that Eucharistic prayer. You can't do it. Yeah. So if this is an Easter, let's say it's this Sunday, and I decide I'm going to use Eucharistic prayer 4, I can't use the preface of Easter and then Eucharistic prayer 4. It's not a validity issue; it's a laicity issue. So it would be illicit mass if I were to do that, right? So yeah, that's the only really one though that has that limitation. And so in the seminary, we were kind of taught that one should be used more, probably like in ordinary time when there's not like
Yeah.
and even to make sure, even like after the 18th week of ordinary time, because you also have like these different celebrations of like Holy Trinity, Corpus Christi.
Yes.
And sometimes, if let's say the solemnity of the Nativity of John the Baptist falls on Sunday, that takes precedence. So, just to ensure you're not violating anything, they taught us like, hey, you should probably want to wait until like halfway through July. It's like, okay, whatever. Yeah, but everything else is kind of discretion of the celebrant. I mean,
I was just wondering how you went.
Well,
With
yeah.
the readings or
No, not necessarily. I kind of look more at the Sunday of the day. So,
Okay.
like usually for like daily mass, I'm more prone to use Eucharist prayer too because that's a little whatever. I have been known to pull out for, especially like during Sundays of ordinary time. One I usually reserve for like higher Sundays, like Sundays of Easter, Easter Sunday itself. The one actually there is one day we're required to use a particular Eucharistic prayer, and that's on Holy Thursday. So
Right.
Holy Thursday, we have to use Eucharistic prayer, the canon,
Canon.
with the proper addendums.
Right.
And that's actually spelled out in the missal
Okay.
for that day. So, but rest of the year, I mean, if you could have priests that just use Eucharistic prayer too every day.
I was just trying to figure out how you chose because various needs are so beautiful.
Yeah,
And you don't hardly hear that.
yeah. I mean, part of that's just because most don't really have practice with them. Like, so for instance, when you're in the seminary, there's not like so we have these thing called practicums.
Yes.
So as we're getting ready for priesthood, we have priesthood practicum as a deacon, and we actually, we vest in the same way, and we kind of walk through the mass and celebrate the mass. And usually we don't really, get much exposure to those. I don't know why. I think it's just kind of like, well, there's like 14 different Eucharistic prayers, and you can't really get through all of them in one, even in one semester, and give it really due justice. So I think a lot of that also comes down to comfort. And so, like personally, I've never used the various needs occasion because I never really had the opportunity or really the training in doing it. Right?
I heard them, like you said, during Advent.
Mhm.
I think it's various needs too. Talks about joy, and it just fits in with the last 2 weeks of Advent.
Yeah, and I mean, and that could work. I mean, like I say, some guys might like look through those things and say, "Oh, that's really applicable for the season." I mean, some guys just like, yeah, but it's also like a elevated time. So I would probably want to look at more, maybe just Eucharist prayer 1, the entire season of Advent, right? So
I
yeah,
was just curious.
yeah, no, I think everyone's a little bit different in that,
Yeah,
right? So it shows the uniqueness of each individual priest.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I know priests that just do the Roman canon all the time, no matter what, daily mass, solemnity. It's just Roman canon, and a lot of that stems from the fact that in the extraordinary form of the mass, you don't have an option.
Right.
It's just it's Roman canon every mass. There's kind of some thought about, like, there's a rumor, whatever. I don't know if it's a rumor at all. I'm not really sure, but they said during Vatican II, the Eucharist prayer 2 is actually written on the back of a cocktail napkin, and that's how it was actually implemented. It was like, oh, let's whatever. I mean, I think a lot of them have some roots, whether in other churches or in other of our sister churches, or other traditions, right? So,
Well, they all start out pretty much the same.
well, there's always the same
And it's
structure. Yeah. So
always after the Jewish prayer.
yeah.
And
So the structure of the Eucharist prayer is the same for all of them. You're always going to find some like a kind of an introduction of evoking of the Trinity. Then there's going to be an epiclesis over the gifts.
Exactly.
There's going to be the institution narrative, right? So that's when it shifts from third person to first person. There's going to be some other form of thanksgiving, and then there's going to be another epiclesis over the people. And then finally, you have what they call the supplication. So you pray for the Pope, pray for the dead, pray for the bishop, that kind of thing. So every Eucharistic prayer has that. There are some, well, there's one in particular that doesn't have the institution at all. And it's actually a tradition in the Eastern Orthodox Church that was adapted and adopted into the Eastern Catholic Church. And the theology behind that is the intention, as long as the priest is intending that it actually is applied. I've used it one time in private mass, never in public.
Mhm.
Part of that is because it's very, very short. It's very, very short.
Okay.
So if you're doing like a private mass, just like on a random like Tuesday, it's like, yeah, okay, I got stuff to do, but I don't want to celebrate mass. So, it's more of an efficiency thing, I think.
Uh-huh.
But I don't do it all. I mean, I can only count like maybe twice whenever we use that Eucharistic prayer.
Okay.
And it's not in the missal. It's part of the tradition of the church. It's part of the liturgy, but it's not actually explicit in the missal of the Roman Rite.
Okay.
So it's kind of, I think it's something like Mari or something like that. This comes from the Eastern tradition, and it's the only Eucharist prayer that does not have an institution narrative, which is interesting. Yeah.
Inquiring minds.
Yeah, I mean, and again, private masses I think are different than public masses too. So like, this is somewhat debated, I guess, although I don't bring it up I won't bring it up here, but
Okay.
at least not explicitly, or at least maybe indicate what I do. So there's of course there was the papal document that came out in 2021, Custodies Traditiones, right, which is basically a limitation of the extraordinary form mass.
Okay.
So in that, what it basically dictated was that priests that were ordained after that promulgation, so after July of 2021, they no longer have the faculties to actually celebrate the extraordinary form of mass.
And when you're saying extraordinary form, you're saying the Trinitine?
Yes. Yeah, they're used synonymously, right? So Trinitine, you went to the old Latin Mass. So let's say, yeah, it's all the same thing,
Grew
right?
up with.
The traditional Latin Mass, all the
Yes.
same. So those that were ordained after 2021 do not have that faculty by law, right? Pope Leo may change that.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know how high that is on his list
Yeah,
to
I was
look
gonna say,
at,
right
right?
now it's plates kind of
Yeah,
full.
right. Yeah. So I imagine that's probably maybe a low priority. I don't know. But the question would be, okay, well, with that though, there came some dubia, some questions from the bishops about, okay, well, how does that apply? Who can actually make that application? So the Holy Father was very clear that that can only come from Rome to give that actual faculty, right? So the Holy Father has to grant that explicitly. Okay. Then the question was raised, okay, well, can there be a mixing of the rites in a particular church? Like, so for instance, let's say you have a parish that they have a tradition of having a extraordinary form mass in the context of other ordinary form masses, right? So let's say you're 10 o'clock and you're 8 o'clock or ordinary form, and then your Novus Ordo, and we've already had a noon mass as extraordinary form.
Okay.
So it was asked, well, okay, can we still do that, right? And the answer came back, well, no. So in other words, not is it just the faculty of celebrating that mass, you also have to have the designated space that's just explicit for that.
Ah,
So that gets very interesting because let's say, okay, I have my church, maybe we do the Novus Ordo, but I have a chapel downstairs that we usually have the extraordinary form. There's separate spaces. Can we do that? There's not a clear response on that,
Okay.
right? So you could argue, well, it's not explicit. It says we have to keep separate spaces. So here we go. Or even let's say, like for us in our parish, we have two churches, right? So now part of this had to be established already as a tradition. So let's say before July 2021, Father Dolan all of a sudden started to want to have extraordinary form masses over at Prez. Okay. And that's all he's doing explicitly. And he tells the Archbishop, that's what I'm doing. He's like, okay, great. After all things due, you could say, well, we've always done extraordinary form over there, and they have the Novus over here at St. Anne. That is perfectly legit, right? That's okay. But when the spaces where that's not designated, the question then comes in, okay, well, is this apply only to private masses or to public masses? It's pretty clear it's public masses is what this applies
Does
to.
it say it or is it just implied?
So that could be a lacuna. So here's the thing. So there have been some brothers who have reached out to determine if it's okay for them to celebrate extraordinary form masses. And they were told no. In private, I mean, like in private.
Okay.
So like it's my day off on Saturday morning. I wake up, I'm like, man, I'm just gonna wake up whenever, and I'm gonna go down and celebrate mass somewhere, wherever it's whether it's the kitchen table or whether it's like a chapel or whatever else, I'm just gonna do it. Okay. Well, that would seem to imply the question then would be, is that universal? So if let's say Father Smith goes down and asks, not any Father Smith here, but I'm just in general, not any Father.
Okay.
There's a Father Smith, right, who goes down to the Archbishop and says, Archbishop, I would like to celebrate private masses in the extraordinary form. Is that okay? And he's told no. The question is that apply to the rest of the presbyterate? Because, well, I didn't ask, and maybe my assumption is that it was a private mass. That it seems that the promulgation is only applying to public masses because there's no designation, and also maybe I'm not doing it in the church. I'm doing my kitchen table. Well, then it's not designated, right? Or if I maybe set up a lawn chair in the back with a card table, and celebrate Mass outside. Well, does that apply, right? So, when it comes to liturgy, right, there's always a question of, if it's not explicit, what does that mean, right? So, in other words, there's kind of two schools of thought on this. So one school of thought would be, well, if it's not explicit, it can't be done. Well, that raises some very interesting questions, right? Like, for instance, here at St. Anne, other churches in the Archdiocese, including the Cathedral Basilica, bells are used during the consecration. Now, it's not explicit to use bells during the consecration.
It says they
Right.
may be used.
Maybe used, right?
Yes.
So, okay,
That's the terminology.
well, it depends on where you look, right? So
Yes,
the germ itself does not mention anything about it.
it does.
It doesn't. It doesn't. The general instruction of the Roman Missal,
You're right. It's in the
right?
missal
Right.
itself.
And it depends on which
It's in
missal.
the red.
Depends on which missal. It does depend on which missal too.
That could
So-
be. I only
So
have one.
so that's the thing, right? So in certain missals, it may be explicit, some may not, or at least be allowed, some it's not. So the question is, well, what takes precedent, and what do you do? Or maybe another indication of that would be, is it proper to do prayers at the base of the altar?
Like Trinity.
Right. So it's not explicit in the ordinary form, right, in the Novus Ordo, that you can or can't do it. So there's a school of thought thinking, well, if it's not explicit, I shouldn't do it. Or if it's not explicit, I should revert back to what the extraordinary form allows, right? So from a liturgical perspective, there's two schools of thought there. Well,
I
that's
should just revert back.
well, so that's the thing. So
Because-
the question is, the extraordinary form is still a valid form of the Mass
Mhm.
that has not been completely restricted. And because of that, you could say, well, because it's a valid form, if it's not explicit in the Novus Ordo, it seems legitimate to use because, well, would that be then considered a different Mass?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Your logic had me thinking.
Well, I mean, see, that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's an open question, right? Because there's
Yeah.
no explicitly said nothing that gives direction on this whatsoever. Now, there is sort of explicitness to say you can't. What's the phrasing? You can't mix the forms,
Correct.
right? So okay. Well, then the question is, what does that mean, right? Okay. Well, it's explicit in the extraordinary form that prayers at the foot of the altar are required for any Mass. Okay. It's not in the ordinary form. Is that mixed in the Mass then? If I do the prayers at the foot of the altar, this is
Because
before,
it explicitly says they're
Right.
done at the foot
right?
of the altar.
So, but that's before the procession. That's before, the Novus Ordo would even begin. Well, okay, is that allowed? I think most liturgies say no, it's not. That'd be
Mhm.
that'd be mixing the form. Okay, but there are other things too, right? So that we would see use of vestment berettas, right? Is it wrong for me to use a beretta in the Novus Ordo?
But why do you want to use the beretta?
Well, it's still a traditional form of the vesting. It's still a vestment, right? It still is allowed, right?
I
So
don't know, is
even
it-
well, sure.
is
I
it
mean, so
allowed?
well, that's the thing. It's not explicit either way or the other, right? So if there's no explicitness in the what really the germ really points out in the missal is that particular colors are used, but the style is not explicit. So in other words, okay, well, a fiddleback, right? If I wear a fiddleback in the Novus Ordo, well, traditionally it's used in the extraordinary form, but even the extraordinary form doesn't really give explicit requirements.
No, it just tells you everything else that you
Right.
have
So,
to use and may use.
It does explicitly call out for use of a manifold. Okay, so can I use a manifold in the ordinary form, right? Well, I mean, again, these are very open questions that are open to interpretation. And the church, I think because it's relatively new, hasn't really gotten around to really kind of answering these things. And probably no one really wants to ask the question because they wouldn't hear the answer either, right? I think there's a lot of, so the same thing going back to should I ask the Archbishop if it's okay for me to celebrate the extraordinary form Mass in private? Maybe out of obedience I should.
Forgiveness and not permission.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, so yeah. I mean, is that something I should do? Well, I still have the faculties to celebrate the extraordinary form, and I'm not actually using a designated space to do it. So I'm still maintaining the requirements of the document.
Is it the spirit of the document, though?
Well, see, that's always the
Yeah.
question, because
Okay.
really all the document, if you boil it all down, what it basically did was allow the local bishop to turn in what's appropriate for their diocese, right? Now, you could say that it's based on the context. It seems very evident that Pope Francis wanted, if not eliminate it, highly restrict it. Okay, so as a bishop, I'm trying to be in line and in union with the Holy Father and the body. What's my interpretation there? Well, okay, maybe I think Archbishop Rzansky held this very well. He said, whatever is happening right now, keep on doing it, and where it's not happening, don't do it. Right? I mean, I thought that was rather fair. That made a lot of sense. It just so happened there's only at that point there were 3. Now there are 2. Francis de Sales and St. Luke's.
Different name now.
Right. It's It's the oratory of St. St. Gregory.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
The other place where it's happening was St. Barnabas.
Yes, and that
Well,
no longer is. It's one deal.
It is now.
Okay.
It is now. But they were up till that point celebrating the extraordinary form of the Mass in their church. They are no longer doing that. I think that happened for a reason. I think it happened for probably a good reason. But I also think there was a lot of things that particular people in that parish did that really shot themselves in the foot. So kind of going back to this whole discussion about picking things or extraordinary from whatever. In the same vein, if I don't ask the question, I can make logic to say this is actually the case. I think what happened was there was a lot of shouting, there was a lot of loudness, there was a lot of maybe making accusations, interpretations that may not have been there, that caused some frustration and probably caused them to say, yeah, you can't do the extraordinary form there anymore. Whereas if there was just some patience and some silence and some prayerful reflection, who knows? They may have the extraordinary form there today, right? And it's not to say they maybe can't in the future. It's just a lot of this is kind of, there can be some politics, but I think also reason is to dictate a lot of these things. Yeah. So I won't say what I do on my private masses because they're private. It's not really hurting anybody. The mass is being celebrated, so good. It's a good topic.
Everybody does some differently.
Well, and I think
if you watch.
Well, yeah, Well, I think also too in the same vein, the question is though, what's in bounds, what isn't? Because I think that was a big frustration with the document that came back in 2021. Is that I think the Holy Father was very clear in the reasons why he was doing what he's doing, and that was kind of coming from the abuse that was perceived in the extraordinary form. Now, that abuse was of the mind that there was a perception, and I really don't know if this was grounded or not. I talked to other people, and some people say, yeah, this probably is grounded. I'm like, okay, well, I've never experienced that personally, but maybe. But also, too, I've only gone through a handful of extraordinary form masses in my life, and I enjoyed them. I thought they were beautiful, and I thought they were mysterious, and I have a great appreciation for it. I'm not married to it. If it comes out tomorrow, Pope Leo says, yeah, we're getting rid of it altogether. Okay, it's not really going to have that much impact on me. I like to learn it. I like to understand what's going on and see the symbolism and the beauty behind it. I think that's good to do. And even if that were suppressed completely, I still probably would study that and look into it.
Oh, yeah.
But I think, yeah, because I think it's good to look back on these other liturgies, see where our roots are, that kind of thing. But um, I think the same way that he critiqued the extraordinary form and was kind of indicating that the people that attend the extraordinary form tend to believe that the extraordinary form is valid and the Novus Ordo is not. Now, of course, I wouldn't hold that. Obviously, I would say that they're both valid forms of mass. Benedict XVI was very clear when he allowed for it. Said they're both valid. They're both Jesus is showing up. That's what the mass does. So that's what they both do, right? And it comes down to rather preference whether you want to go to the extraordinary form or go to the ordinary form. Up to you. Which I think in general is a good approach, right? You're leaving the individual person to determine what's best for them, to how they experience Jesus the best. So good, great. I think the frustration came in the fact that even though the Holy Father was clear about his limiting the extraordinary form, he wasn't as critical in the abuses in the Novus Ordo. Because I think you're talking about, every priest does things different. Yes, that's true. And some priests, they celebrate illicit masses in our own diocese. And they're brothers, and I love them, and I want the best things for them, and I want them to stop. Right? I want them to celebrate the illicit form of the mass.
Just each priest even reverences the altar differently. Some are so reverent, you think Jesus is right there, and others it's just
Yeah. I mean, and again, that's not a critique against any of my brothers, because hey, as long as you're venerating the altar, good.
You're venerating
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I think to that end, we also have priests that make up their own words of the institution and during the Eucharistic prayer, or make up their own forms of the collect, right?
Yes.
And even though they still say, this is my body, this is my blood, while they're holding the body and blood of Jesus, good. That's a valid mass. Wonderful. As long as you're just having some reading, you're good. It's not the fullness of it, and it's not what you as a priest are called to do. If Holy Mother Church is giving us, Holy Mother Church gives a lot of options. She does a lot. If you look at any liturgy we have, there are tons of options that you have within that liturgy. So why would we want to expound beyond that or limit that? Let's work within the options we're given and do it the way Holy Mother Church wants us. And as an obedient son of the church, I should do that. And if I'm not, I might have to kind of do some reflection on, and I think hopefully the assumption charitably would be ignorance. It's hard to assume that for a priest, because really they should know better. I do know that when the new translations came out in 2011, there were a lot of priests that retired because it was just too hard to learn the new words. Okay. Honestly, I don't know. If I'm, even at 45, I understand it can be difficult to kind of change paths even after 6 years of priesthood. When something new happens, okay, well, that's kind of taking some time to do that. And I do think it eventually gets to the point where I just can't. By the time I actually do make this change and actually can do it properly, I'm going to be retired anyway. So, okay, I can't necessarily critique that, because, okay, I can understand that. Even the transition between the two popes, between, the two bishops, between, Archbishop Carlson, Archbishop Zansky, it does take some getting used to between saying Robert Mitchell. Those are two different names. And so I know I've caught myself a few times.
That's what Post-its are for.
Well, yeah. Well, but still, but you expand that to different things. Okay.
I agree. Yes.
I've actually been kind of proud of myself and watch this about script tomorrow probably. But I've been proud of, I haven't really, I take it back. This past weekend I did screw up on that. I said Francis, I went back and said, Leo. So yeah, just gonna take some time, So I'm not critical of guys when change happens, that it's hard to change. I get it. But even with changes, we have some of my brothers who, even from the prior, translation, are still doing it wrong. Are still saying words, making them up. It's like, well, I don't know what your excuse is then, right? So I think if Holy Mother Church gives options, we should use those options, and we shouldn't expound past those or limit those. Let's just do what the church wants us to do. Pretty easy. I don't know. For some, maybe not. I don't know. Well, it looks like our Google Meet kind of crapped out. I'm sorry about that. But we also have chat going on too. So if anyone online has a question, please feel free. It looks like there's about 3 people watching. That's great. Thank you for joining us. Any other questions though?
Mission of Joy.
Yeah. So yeah, what that's referring to is there's a new initiative coming from Augustine Institute. It's a great organization. We're happy to have them in St. Louis. That is taking the opportunity to look for those who could possibly be join evangelistic mission to other Catholics, other people, and kind of spread the good news of Jesus and bring people closer to Jesus. So as we all know, evangelization is not just a mission of the priesthood. It's not a mission of deacons and bishops. It is, but it's not just those people. It's up to everybody to evangelize and to bring them closer to Jesus. So I think this is a way to help do that.
Who is it open to?
It's open to anybody.
Okay.
So the way it's working is we were asked about a month ago, 2 months ago, to maybe discern certain people in our parish who would be good candidates and maybe eligible to do this.
What is eligible?
Well, I think that's more subjective, right?
Okay.
So in other words, there may be people in our parish who this is not what they're called to do, right?
Okay.
And so we want to be aware of that and work with the Holy Spirit to do that. I will say, maybe I'm a bad pastor or a bad priest, I don't know. For me, it was difficult to do that. Not just because I'm relatively...
People are to eliminate people.
Both and.
Okay.
And the reason is because, A, I'm relatively new to the parish. It hasn't really even been 2 years yet. So trying to determine who that person would be. The other side of the coin, too, is I think if the pastor reaches out, and this is maybe why they asked us to do this, because when the pastor reaches out to you, I think you're more compelled to say yes. And I don't want anyone to feel that they have to say yes. And I can even say it to someone and say, look, you don't have to say yes, but I'm asking this. But people are still going to say yes because...
The pastor asked me.
Right, exactly. And not only that, but also like, I don't know what people have on their plates, right? So there's people, especially those who have families, those who are engaged with other things in the parish. Usually what happens is you go to your people that you see every day, you say, can you do this? And they are adding to their plate. And so I will be very honest. I thought it was very unfair to approach the pastors in that way and kind of prod them, so to speak, to do that. So I think most pastors took the same tack and said, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. I don't want to force people or do this to other
Most
people.
people aren't even hearing about it.
Well, but see, that's the thing. It's like, okay, so to counter that,
Okay.
it seems like what they did is they're opening this up now with the entire archdiocese and saying, okay, look, here's a link to go apply to this and go determine if you want to do this. So leave it up to the individuals to make that determination. Okay, good. The pastors, though, have the right to say yes or no. So in other words, if John Public in my parish says, yeah, you know what, I think I'm really cut off for this, I'm going to go do that. Now, granted, I haven't talked to anybody in 15 years, and I don't really know how to engage with anyone, but I'm going to do it. It's like, okay. So that goes to the Office for Ministry of Joys. They contact me and say, hey, this guy, John Public, wants to be an evangelist, wants to go out and learn how to do this. So now I'm in a different situation, right? Because now I'm like, well, wait a minute, is this guy really going to be good for this or not? Now, the nice thing about it is they've told us that it is all, maybe I'm letting the cat out of the bag. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but it's all kept secret. So in other words, if a pastor says no, it doesn't come from the pastor saying no to the person. the organization will contact them and says, "Thank you for your interest," and they do some kind of letdown. I don't know how they're gonna word it, right?
Okay.
Otherwise, if the pastor says yes, okay, they're gonna, Now the other situation here is there's a cost to the parish,
That's what I thought.
right?
Okay.
So that's another factor. It's like, okay, great. And I think a lot of pastors, I know I've struggled with this too. I've been going back and forth and been praying about it because I think in general it's a good thing. I think it's great that we're going to try and train people to be evangelists and go out and bring people closer to Jesus. I think that's great.
There's
And
many ways to do
well, that's what. Well, see, I think that's the idea though too.
I'm thinking OCIA.
Well, there's tons. There's
Yeah.
tons.
Yeah.
And so that's I think sometimes the struggle we talk about evangelization is that we get sometimes too narrow. And this also may be why they came to the pastors first, because I think what they're trying to get at is like, okay, look, you're ultimately going to be the one making these determinations of what you're going to do with these people after they're trained, right? So let's say John Polo comes in and says, yeah, I want to be do this. And I say, well, I mean, you've never had any experience with this before and you haven't talked to anyone in 20 years, but okay. All right. So, and I don't know what kind of training they're going to receive. I don't know if they're going to be like, hey, here's how you do speech writing, or here's how you fundraise, or here's how you go and entice people to come into the church, or, here's how you go. I don't really know how they're going to do that. So not knowing that, I have someone I was going to get trained in this come back to me and say, okay, Father, what do you want me to do? And my response will be like, I don't know. Where do you feel called to do? What do you, I mean, so, and part of the job of the pastor is to use the gifts that people have for the benefit of the parish to kind of foster that growth, foster that spirit, foster the spirit within them. But again, the question comes down to like, well, how were you trained? What'd you do in the training? Okay, that might give me a better understanding of how it works. But then I have to ask myself, are you someone that really should be doing this or can be doing this? Or how is that going to grow the parish in you doing this type of thing? So it complicates a pastor's life. And I like I said, I think in general, it's a good idea. I kind of wish what they would have done, and maybe there's still time for this. I wish they would have brought it into the individual parishes to have that communication. And there was some communication from like Harriet early on when I first got here about that, but there was really no follow-up after that. And maybe this is the follow-up. I don't know. But I would much rather say, okay, we have some people in our parish that, like, for instance, we need some more catechists. Who are some good candidates for catechists? We need some people to maybe be greeters at the Mass. Who would be great candidates for that? We need some people to maybe go door to door and welcome people into the community, right? And we're actually from parish council standpoint, we've been talking about that, of actually establishing some kind of like gift basket or goodie bag that can be given to people that move in the area and kind of ask them, hey, we're here. If you want something, come on by. But now we're doing this, and so does that kind of take away from that? Does that kind of add to it? I think that one of the struggles of having programs that come from the top down is that it feels forced. And I think a lot of my brother pastors kind of take that tack with a lot of these things. And also, too, there's somewhat of this is not maybe fair, but there also is somewhat maybe of a distrust in what is motivating this, or maybe more who's motivating this. I don't know. I know that when I first read the email, my first thought was, oh, great, more to do, right? Whereas, could we have just done this grassroots here in the parish and maybe done a better job? I mean, possibly, I don't know. But now it's out there, and now it seems that that there's definitely a desire to do this, especially from the Archbishop. So again, as obedient priest, yeah, okay, I'm going to do what I have to do, and I'm going to probably get emails from people who are signed up for this, or maybe I'm not, because like you're saying, I don't know how many people know about it.
You have to. I did not find out about it from our parish.
Well, and probably
but it wasn't on Facebook.
Well, and part of that's because I think the reason why that is because the initial contact came just to the pastors. We were just said, hey, pick 10 people. It's like, okay, right. And what's our timeline? Like, there was no like timeline given. And then all of a sudden, we're going to send this out to everybody. Oh, okay. Well, then great. And we're going to contact you if they say yes or what they do. Okay. So I think most pastors are like, okay, fine. But this seems like a you thing, and I'll just be over here if you need me kind of situation. So the communication was more done again from the top down. And so maybe the intention was that we send this out to the parish, but it was never explicitly said, go do this, right?
It's still kind of vague finding everything out about it.
Oh, it's still vague for us. Like, honestly, I don't know what the curriculum is. I don't know what they're going to do.
Well,
I have no idea.
That was part of my question. What is involved in this? Is it like the other, what was the name of that other program, that 3-year program they had?
Oh, was Tame Tomorrow or Beyond Sunday?
It was where they trained people from your parish, and then you had to commit to.
Oh yeah, was it? It was like late train.
Yes.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. As a matter of fact, last parish we had some people who were trained in that, and it was like, okay, cool. But then it's also like, okay, and you get to know them. You're trying to figure out what they do, and they may have some really good ideas being open to that. But as associate, I couldn't really make any decisions.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, but then I don't know. So
I'm just curious.
me too. Honestly, I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know how they're going to handle this or what they're going to do or how. I mean, but yeah, when you use a word like evangelization, I think that's sometimes the struggle is that sometimes there's such a stricture on what an individual's idea of evangelization is that they go down a path that way and don't necessarily look at the entire.
Yes.
And plus, like, every parish is different. So again, you're saying this word evangelization. Well, here's how I see that in our parish. Is that where they're going to be trained to do? And I honestly don't know, because there's been no input, or from my understanding, at least, question asked from us to do that.
So you know about a little bit more than I know.
I just know kind of the basics of what they're trying, how they're doing it.
Okay.
But as far as like what they're talking about, I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no
Just
idea.
trying to figure it out.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
If you know, let me know.
I will.
Yeah. Oh, great. So one person here asks, can you talk about this being the Jubilee year? Yes, I can. So this year being one of the 25 years, every 25 years or so, there are extraordinary Jubilee years that are called by particular popes, but in general, every 25 years, there's a Jubilee called. Now, biblically speaking, if you look back in the Old Testament, we saw this actually in the book of Numbers, in Leviticus, that a Jubilee would be called about there's kind of more solemnity between, like, let's say a 25-year, a 50-year, a 100-year, where even in the Old Testament, anything that was like land that was leased or like, something that was borrowed, we returned, right? So, or even like, slaves set free, there's kind of like an evening. Everyone gets even as far as, paying debts, everything's wiped clean. You're kind of starting back at zero, right? And so I think in Leviticus, it was the law of Moses. I think it was to try to bring goodwill towards the people and recognize each other as brothers and sisters, right? So, hey, you're the tribe of Judah, I'm the tribe of Levi. We're still, Jewish people, we're followers of God. We trust in the same God. Let's treat each other that way. And so any debt I have against you, don't worry about it, and vice versa. So the church also kind of takes up that mantle. And she has, over time, celebrated certain aspects of Jubilee in the time where that may be needed. So on this Jubilee year, Pope Francis decided to make it a year of hope, right? And, for whatever reason that was, maybe it's just because of all the turmoil coming out of COVID, out of, the political strife that happens throughout the world, the different wars. One may look at this and say, well, hope is really necessary, to bring people comfort, to bring people drive, and just, if anything, not to fall in despair, right? So that's what we're celebrating this year. And so each individual diocese initiates a pilgrimage, in this case, the Pilgrimage of Hope. And they've dedicated certain sites around their areas that people could travel to, pray, and receive plenary indulgences within this particular Jubilee year. In the Archdiocese of St. Louis, there's 7 locations, right? Nine locations, all throughout the Archdiocese. So you can check the Archdiocese webpage. They will have those listed. The closest one in our area is the Holy Spirit Adoration Sisters, who are down on 70. We also have the Carmelite Sisters out on Clayton Road. The Cathedral Basilica and the Old Cathedral are both sites. So there are particular prayers associated. Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about just like where we are. That's kind of the closest locations that we would probably find ourselves. But there are others. And so this year.
Have to visit all of them?
No, you just have to visit one.
Visit one.
You don't have to visit any of them. I mean, but in order to receive the indulgence, you'd have to at least go to one of these sites and have specific prayers that are set. And those are all on, I guess I should bring it up, I think. Let's see if I can find it on the webpage. Now, of course, the regular things would apply for a plenary indulgence, such as you have to receive communion on the day you go on the pilgrimage. You have to go to confession within 21 days of doing that. You pray for the intentions of the Pope, of the Holy Father. And then the big one that's kind of a sticking point is be free of any temporal attachment. So what does that mean? Well, what that basically means is that you don't have any desire for anything other than the things that are of God. So we all need to breathe. So the fact that I am breathing, does that indicate that I don't have a desire not to, or I don't have a desire not to breathe? Well, okay. I mean, part of this is conscience, right? So maybe a better example would be, okay. So let's say, for instance, instead of going to pray over in the church for half an hour, I'd rather go to Dairy Queen and pick up a Blizzard. Okay, well, that's not necessarily something sinful about that, but that does show that I have an attachment to something that is of God, but not the highest things of God, right? So to that point, if let's say I'm walking into the church during this pilgrimage, and like, well, I could really go for a Dairy Queen Blizzard. Well, all right, that may not be a plenary indulgence, even though I said the prayers and do all that stuff. It would still be a partial indulgence, which is very, very good, but it may not be a plenary indulgence. So part of that is where our minds and hearts are at the moment we receive the indulgence and what our intentions are. And it's very, very difficult because, like for instance, that's why it's also maybe best to have these intentions for someone who's already passed, because they get to reap the benefit of that right away. Whereas if I were to, let's say, do it for myself or another living person, well, the struggle there would be, okay, once I start having that attachment, well, there's no longer plenary indulgence there. Maybe still a partial, right? But it wouldn't be as beneficial to someone who's already in purgatory rather than somebody who's currently living. Does that make sense? So, okay, so let's put it this way.
I could have an attachment to a dead person.
No. What I'm saying is my intention. So, in other words, if I'm intending this plenary indulgence for someone that's already passed, let's say my grandmother, right? And I go to confession within 21 days, receive the Eucharist the day I actually go to this site. I pray for the intention of the Pope, and you know what? I'm just solely directed on getting this grace for my loved one.
Isn't that an attachment?
But it's not necessarily, because it's based in charity, right? It's not based on me. It's not like an attachment of things that are helping me.
Okay, so now we have another condition.
Well, no. So what we're talking about attachment would be something that's just beneficial for me, right? So in other words, breathing benefits me, right? Eating benefits me, right? Even like procreating, that really benefits me in some way, right? Okay, so those things, right. So all these things, but having the intention for someone who's already passed, I'm directing myself towards God and the grace that God wants to give, not just me, but also the person. That person will benefit right away from it. So in other words, if I do it, if I have these intentions that are good, I'm doing these things that are good, and I have merited a plenary indulgence for that person, they automatically go to heaven. They're in, right? Whereas, let's say I have that same towards my mom, who's not passed, she's living. Okay, well, she may benefit from that indulgence initially, because I don't necessarily have that attachment right now. But after I leave that site and say, man, I could really go for a Dairy Queen Blizzard right now, instead of saying that presence of God in the church, well, now it's no longer plenary indulgence for her. It's a partial indulgence for her.
Or could that just be the evil one tempting you?
It doesn't really matter, right? Because the point of the plenary indulgence is that it has a benefit. It's removing all temporal punishment right away for that soul, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay.
well, okay, who would get the most benefit from that? Someone that's already deceased, right? Because otherwise, I have to maintain that for the rest of my mom's life to actually her to receive that indulgence right away. So, is it possible for me to maintain that detachment to, keep on maintaining those requirements for the indulgence until my mother passes? Sure, it's possible. Not very probable, right? Because we all have particular attachments, right? Like as soon as I get hungry, well, that's an attachment. And instead of going to feed my hunger, should I stay here in the presence of Jesus and pray for my mom? That'd be better. But, so yeah, it's kind of a interesting scenario. Let's see. I'm trying to find where the prayers for the Jubilee.
This is for the whole year. Right?
Yep. So let's see if the okay. This AI thing is kind of interesting. Thank you. All right. They have this AI now on the webpage for the ArchSTL that's kind of freaking me out. Okay, they say by participation in the Holy Mass or another liturgical service, right? Or acts of piety such as Station of the Cross, praying the Rosary, or visits the Blessed Sacrament, and there for a suitable period of time engage in Eucharistic adoration and meditation, including with the Our Father, the profession of faith for the Mass, and a prayer to the Blessed Virgin Mary for the faithful who cannot participate in the various solemn celebrations. So to get the indulgence, you have to do at the site, participate in Holy Mass, or another at the site, or a liturgical service such as morning prayer or evening prayer. So you can do that individually if you wanted to. Or acts of piety such as Station of the Cross, praying the Rosary, or visits to the Blessed Sacrament. And there for a suitable period of time, doesn't really say how long it is, however you feel proper. Engage in Eucharistic adoration and meditation, concluding with the Our Father, the profession of faith, which would be one of the creeds, Apostles' Creed, Nicene Constantinople Creed, and a prayer to the Blessed Virgin Mary. So, for the faithful who cannot participate in various solemn celebrations, pilgrimages, and pious actions. Right, so that's kind of what it is. They recite the Our Father, the Procession of Faith, and other prayers in conformity with the objective of the whole year in their homes whenever they are confined, offering up their suffering. So this is for those who can't make it to these sites. So that's kind of what it's calling you to do. So that's how you receive the plenary indulgence for the pilgrimage of the Jubilee of Hope. But if you can't make it to these sites, there are other things you can do to receive that grace. Recite the Our Father, Procession of Faith, other prayers for those who, for the whole year, and unite their sufferings for the hardships of their lives. You also works of mercy and penance in order to actually receive the indulgence if you can't make it to these sites. So look at the ArchSTL webpage. They'll tell you what that's all about, and that's how that would work. So, prayers for those impacted by the most recent tornado. Of course, yeah. So we definitely have prayed for them in Mass and other occasions. So we keep them in our prayers. As a matter of fact, we sent a flock note out yesterday with opportunities for those that can help those impacted. So we encourage everyone to check that out and continue to pray for those that were affected by the storms this past week. So yeah, good. Any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies? We'll give a few more seconds to anyone on the chat wants to ask anything else. But otherwise, I guess we'll call it a night. All right. Thanks for coming. All right, everyone. We'll see you next week. I think next week is still Father the Father.
It is.
It is. So
Still May.
still May. So we'll look for June, and we'll maybe talk about next week what we might look for do for Friends, Food, and Faith, the first Tuesday of June. So have a good night. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
I am curious about vision